Hello, I'm Anoosh Chakelian, Britain editor of the New Statesman and host of this podcast. And joining me in the studio, I have our political correspondent, Freddie Hayward. And down the line, we have Ben Walker, the New Statesman's senior data journalist. This is an episode we like to call You Ask Us. And we've been digging around in our virtual mailbag and have brought a couple of questions that you've sent in to discuss. I've got our first question from James, who asks, how would the results of a general election change if all British residents were allowed to vote, not just British citizens? In other words, what happens if we let immigrants without British passports vote? And actually, this is something the Labour Party did consider, didn't they, last year? They were working on proposals to get to extend voting rights to millions of long-term EU citizens and other non-UK nationals. I think Starmer said at the time that it feels wrong to exclude them if they live here and pay tax.
Yeah, there was quite a big backlash, though, so let's wait and see if
I don't think it's going to turn
that.
up in the manifesto.
It's not going to be a priority, I don't think, in the first term.
You can see that they have had that instinct, because they've spoken about it a number of times, I think in 2020 as well. Ben, what difference would that make? I think James wants to know whether it would affect the results of an election.
Yeah, what difference would it make if you enfranchised all of the British immigrant population in this country with the right to vote? And sorry, not much. Very little. Here's the thing about people who move to countries and, you get your citizenship, you get your passport, and you get the right to vote. Most of them don't vote compared to naturalised, long-term native British citizens. Turnout amongst minority ethnic communities has always been below that of whiter neighbourhoods. Or we would have seen it in the Rochdale by-election if Rochdale went as expected, but we know in the case of Rochdale there was something quite special, a disproportionate turnout there. No, the truth of the matter is, by virtue of being an immigrant, by virtue of coming to this country, starting life in this country, you are sort of more focused on your survival, of getting by, of paying your taxes, and settling and looking beyond at the more civic pleasures just doesn't factor as much. So turnout by and large amongst first naturalised generation immigrants and others is often lower. And so if you gave them the vote, I don't think it would do much. Nevertheless, it would change this. So in my ward, for instance, which is Chester City Centre, I have 11,000 electors. And of those, around about 2,000 of them are European citizens. Because in local elections, European citizens can vote in local elections, but in general elections, they can't. So I have an 11,000 person electorate, whereas in the general election, it would just be like 9,000. Okay, so that 2,000. And what I'm able to work out in my own ward is they don't turn out by as much compared to the more native Britons living here. In terms of who they vote for, well, first generation immigrants, or those who've just got their vote, historically, they often vote for the party that will guarantee their survival, that will guarantee their place in the country, and that has often been parties of the left. That has historically, of course, been the Labour Party. I suppose if you gave more, European citizens the vote, they may be the ones bringing Brexit up the agenda, perhaps a little bit more than we otherwise would be, as we otherwise are. Brexit sits as an issue to around about, between 5 and 10% of us, like a top voter motivating issue. I suppose if you added a few million European citizens, of which 30 to 50% will turn out, that won't make much of a difference. But though I said my ward, my own seat, would only see 2,000 extra electors in a general election year, you go all the way down to London, you will see the electorate just jumping by a sizable margin. So something to bear in mind, bit of a tangent here, but when we choose our constituencies, when we do our boundaries, we do it based on electors, people who have the right to vote. Okay, that's not the actual number of people living there. And that's a bit of a problem when you live in an immigrant-heavy area, a European citizen-heavy area, because you have your 70 to 80,000 electors, and then you have, sometimes in some London seats, around about 50 to 60 to 70,000 European and immigrant citizens. And the casework load for a lot of those MPs, a lot of overwhelmingly Labour MPs, is massive compared to the more, 99% British citizen seats. Okay, and so to be honest with you, changing, giving the people the right changes the equation completely, because it changes how we draw our boundaries. It means we look at a different electorate, and you'll see a hell of a lot more seats in London, a hell of a lot more seats in urban areas. And there is a debate to be had. Should you just give it to electors, or should you give it to population? Because casework load is, it transcends electors, it transcends population. But to answer the point in a breathless summary, will it change much? Not by much, because turnout is by and large low amongst immigrant communities. Will it shift it in favour of, parties that are more pro-immigrant? Yeah, probably. By how much? A percentage point or two, if that. Because, like I say, the turnout amongst those types of people is quite low.
Is there a big difference between European immigrants and non-European immigrants?
Oh, absolutely. I always love this anecdote because it always shocks a few very white people. Rewind yourselves back to 2013 to 15 when you had the rise of UKIP. And they were doing particularly well quite nationally. They were on, mid-teens, doing a lot better than Reform are today, actually performing really well in by-elections, winning slews of council seats. And they were polling around about 8% or so in London. And, that's pretty par for the course for a party on the radical right. We're not allowed to say far right now, are we? And you look in the data tables, you look in the polling tables, and what will always shock me, and it was even proven when you actually went out on the street, was UKIP support amongst BME voters, black and minority ethnic voters, emphasis with the right to vote, was similar, 8% or so. It was quite surprising in London. And the long and short of it was this. Afro-Caribbean communities who had since moved to Britain, who'd since naturalised, got their citizenship, got their right to vote, they started to think beyond survival, like first-generation migrants do. They started to think more about what kind of country they wanted to live in. And they came steeped with quite severely Christian values. And what 2013 to 15 was during the time when gay marriage was being pushed through Parliament, and the Conservatives and Labour backed it, even though I think it was a minority of Conservative MPs, but we'll leave that by the by. The point of the matter was you had a lot of Afro-Caribbean voters with their socially conservative values actually thinking UKIP was the party for them. I'm talking by a lot. I'm talking around about, a few percent, 5 to 8%, according to polls in London. Okay, that's quite something. But European citizens, yes, a bit more, I suppose, socially liberal, because, when you are born in relative affluence, you tend to have more socially progressive views. But I have to emphasize, don't generalize all Europeans. Polish migrants to Britain tend to have a quite socially conservative outlook as well. And if you have Polish-heavy wards in northern England, you'll notice that more and more of them are voting in Conservative candidates in council elections.
It's really interesting. Thanks so much, Ben, for taking us through it so thoroughly. I suppose it's just a reminder. I think Labour were accused of wanting to gerrymander, but it's just a reminder that you can't assume, as we've spoken about before, what immigrant groups will be voting for. Thanks so much for watching. We'd love to know what you think. Please make sure you leave your comments below. And if you enjoyed watching this podcast, you can watch more of our videos on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe.